So storage accounts, Azure Files, blob storage, Azure File Syncs, all of that, all of those important topics. On day 3,
So we're going to cover how to manage Azure Active Directory objects. What is RBAC, so role-based access control, and how can we manage and why should you use RBAC? And then we're going to talk about managing subscriptions and governance. On day 2, we're going to talk about storage. So storage accounts, Azure Files, blob storage, Azure File Syncs, all of that, all of those important topics. On day 3, we're going to talk about deploying and manage Azure Compute Resources, so virtual machine scale sets, containers, and also web app. And then on the 4th day, we're going to talk about networking, virtual networking, DNS, security, load balancing. It's not just VNets, okay? It's load balancer, application gateways, Azure firewalls, okay? So all of those things we're going to talk. And then on the last day is, I just save it so that we can talk about monitoring and backup of Azure resources. So you're going to talk about monitoring and about backing up and recovery. So basically all the services around monitoring and backing up. Okay, so let's talk about Azure identities and governance. So our agenda will be managing Azure subscriptions. We're going to talk about resource utilization and consumption. Also manage resource groups, manage role-based access control. So those will be the big topics for us in this set here. So creating and manage users. So on Azure, usually use Azure Active Directory to create your users, and it's Azure Active Directory that is responsible to provide the authentication and authorization mechanisms for Azure. So every user that needs access to Azure resources, they need to have an Azure AD user account. That user account will contain all the information needed to authenticate the user during the sign-in process. And once authenticated, the Azure AD will build an access token, and then will authorize that user and understand what kind of resources that user can access or not. Okay, so when we say Azure AD, we're talking about an Azure AD tenant, and we can have one Azure AD account, which is the account that you log in the portal of Azure, so portal.azure.com, and then you can access a series of Azure AD tenants, but you can also see the dashboard. Only one tenant at each time. You cannot see all the tenants at the same time, like you can, for example, to see several storage accounts or several Azure virtual machines. That is just not possible. So, but we have a switch button that we can easily switch between one tenant and another tenant. So let's just jump in and do a demo exactly on that. How can we switch between those Azure AD tenant directories? So from the time that we are delivering these sessions and recording until the time that you might watching the sessions, the Azure portal might have changed, and we need to assume that as normal, because Microsoft is always providing new features, new services, and improving the usability of the Azure portal. So if you see your version of the Azure portal slightly different than the one that you see in the demos that I'm providing, find that as normal. You just need to adapt, and I'm sure it will not be majorly different. So I'm sure that you can handle those changes. So in order to change your Azure AD tenant, we need to go to the home page of the Azure portal, and here on the top we have this icon that says directly plus a subscription. When clicking on this, we have the favorites and the all directories tab. When selecting the all directories tab, we can have here several different Azure AD tenants, and we just need to click on this one. Then the Azure portal will load, And if we go now to Azure Active Directory under the burger menu, so we are on the Azure Active Directory tenant for that specific tenant, as you can see in this demo. If you want to go back, you just need to do the same procedure. So just click here. Basically, I want to go back to my favorite one. So I just click and there you go. I'm in my home tab again with my subscription, my resources, and I'm under this tenant again. Okay, to go and to see what are the users that we have on our Azure Active Directory, we can just go to the users entry under the management group, and this will open the all users view. And then you can see, like you have here on the screenshot, you can see all the users that you have there. You can always search, okay, for specific users, and then of course it will just show exactly a small subset of those users. What kind of users do we have? So we have three big categories of users: cloud identities, directory synchronized identities, and guest users. So cloud identities are the users that exist only on Azure AD, like an administrator account and users that we have created in Azure AD. I can also have directory synchronized identities. Those users exist in an Azure Active Directory, but also on-premise Active Directory. And then they are synchronized, they get synchronized via Azure AD Connect. And then we have guest users. Those are users that exist outside Azure and even outside on-prem. They don't have anything to do with on-prem. Examples are accounts from other cloud providers, like a traditional Microsoft consumer account, an Xbox account, Gmail account, etc. All of those are considered to be guest user accounts. How can we add users? Well, just go to Azure Active Directory in the Azure portal, and then under the all users, just click on plus new user, and then you go to a UI experience, and you just need to provide what is the username, the name, first name, last name, and what will be the initial password. And there's also some other information like what is the job title, the country, the location of that user that you also might be interested in filling in. So let's do a demo and let's create an Azure AD using the Azure portal. Okay, so let's create an Azure AD user. I'm going to the burger menu and I'm going to navigate under Azure Active Directory. We wait for it to load, and I will need to navigate under Manage. I select the users option. You can see that I have several users in my Azure Active Directory tenant. And what I'm going to do now is just click here on top where it says new user. When it says new user, you can say, hey, I want to create a user, or I want to invite a new user. My goal now is to create a new user. And I will just say here, for example, okay, it's going to be John.Doe. I can provide a name, so let's just do John Doe. I can provide what is the first name, what is the last name. Then under password, I can just auto-generate. You can even click here to see the password. I'm not going to do that. Or I can type the password myself if I want it. I can add this user to some existing Azure AD groups. And I could provide here some more information about usage location and the job info and the department. I don't need to do this. I'm just going to accept the empty default ones, and I will just click create, and that's it. I had created a user AD user in Azure Active Directory. Using the Azure portal gives you a very good experience. It's easy to use. You just need a browser. You just navigate to the correct places. And even when you don't know how to do certain tasks, it is quite easy to figure it out. But of course, then it is something that you cannot automate. It is really hard, to be honest, to automate those kinds of things. So using command line utilities, it's a must, especially when you need to automate creations of users, or when you have, for example, a CSV file with hundreds of users that you need to create. For example, one of my customers, they are a university, and every single year they have thousands of new users that they need to create on Azure AD, which is basically the new students. So we need to go there and we need to create one by one. And believe me, this was done by someone there that went to the Azure portal and clicked new and was creating every single user. Of course, well, someone noticed that and said, no way, just can't do this. We need to automate this. So we had a CSV, created some PowerShell, and then there you go. Okay, we were able in a very, very easy way to do that. So this is the kind of stuff that I can do using PowerShell and using a command line utility. I can also create and manage groups. So Azure AD allows me to define two different types of users, like security groups or Office 365 groups. So security groups are the ones that are most common, and they are used to manage members, computer access, shared resources, etc. But I can also use Office 365 groups. That's a specialized group for Office 365, as the name says. That gives me providing opportunities to give members access to shared mailboxes, calendar files, a SharePoint site, some OneDrive files, Teams, and things like that. How can I view all the available groups? So again, when you go to the Azure AD experience on the Azure portal, on the dashboard, you can just click all groups like you did all users, but now all groups, and this will just show you all the groups, and it will tell you what is the kind of group type and what's the kind of membership that that group has. Well, talking about memberships on groups. So this membership value, I have two options, assign and dynamic user. So the big difference that I have is that assign will contain only users or groups inside groups that I have selected. So I just go there and I have to assign the users and groups to groups. But I can also have dynamic user. In dynamic user, I do not assign specific users. What I do is I create rules based on characteristics that you have on the user. So for example, I want to create a dynamic user group called users from country X. So I will go to the location and I see, which is the location that people have here that is from country X. So I just go there and I just find every single user from that country, and this builds the group membership. So you belong or not, depending on that property that you have in your user profile. I'll just give you an example of a single property, but it can be more than one. You can have a multiple property making the rule. Active Directory and Azure AD with AD Connect. So this is just to explain that we have Azure AD. It's an awesome opportunity. It is a huge difference from what we had with on-premise Active Directory. But it's not just slap your fingers and today everyone starts to use Azure AD and they do not have anything on-prem. So companies will have on-prem resources for years and years and years, and they can't get rid, even if they want, and they do a huge effort from one day to the other. So we need to synchronize the identities that we have on premises. To do that, we use a tool called Azure AD Connect that will synchronize the users that we have on-prem with Azure AD. So we just bring those identities to the cloud. And you can bring all of them if you want, or you can just bring a subset of that. And even the way that you bring them, it's also another challenge, because you can just bring the identities, not the passwords, and then the authentication still happens on premises. For that, you have pass-through authentication, or you can use ADFS. Or I can also bring the hash. I can also do identity plus password hash synchronization, and this will bring not only the user but also the password hash. And with this, what happens is that the authentication can now happen on Azure. I can also even do write back for the password. So that means that if I change the password on the cloud, it will be right back. So it will be sent back that update to on-premises. That's not the default behavior, but you can activate that if you need and if you want. In terms of guest accounts and Azure Active Directory business to business, so guest users, they access Azure AD business to business. So you can invite guest users to your Azure AD organization, group, or application. After you invite the user, their account is added to your Azure AD as a guest account. This is quite cool, to be totally honest with you, because even if that user doesn't have any kind of cloud identity that you can federate, imagine that is a company that doesn't even have cloud. You send an email, so Azure AD sends an email to that user mailbox and just saying that, hey, you have been added to the Azure tenant X. Click here to create your user account. So it just goes there, creates a password, and that user password will be created inside your Azure AD. Then you can give authorization to the resources that you have. So it is quite interesting, the concept on how to do this. So let's do a demo. How can we give guest user accounts access, okay, to Azure Active Directory business to business? Okay, now it's time to create a new user, but a business to business user. So I just will navigate under users, just like I did in the previous demo. I will click new user, and now I will select the option that says invite a user. I will just type here, for example, John Doe, and I'll just say john@contoso.com. This will be the email address of our user, and I'll just say John, last name is Doe. You can even write a personal message like, hey John, this is to invite you to our Azure AD tenant. Then, like a regular user, you can do job info, usage location, etc. And then instead of create, well, you just need to do invite. This will send an email to that user. And there you go. So that email has been sent, and now that user needs to accept that invitation. And then after that, well, it's going to have a user in Azure Active Directory, in our Azure Active Directory, and we can give some permission, so using authorization for that specific user. Azure multi-factor authentication supplies added security for your identities by requiring 2 or more elements to do the full authentication procedure. These elements can fall into 3 categories: something you know, something you possess, or something that you are. So if it is something that you possess, it might be like a mobile application that will receive like a notification token using like an authenticator app, or a token generating devices. Okay, you have like those RSA devices that you click and you just get a bunch of numbers that could be your token. Something that you are, typically like a biometric properties such as fingerprint or face scan, like when we use like a Surface device with Windows Yellow. So things like that. And of course, never forget something you know, a password, or answering basic security questions. You have to have, okay, so 2 elements, but each element, okay, needs to be in a different category. So it cannot be a password and a security question. That will not be multi-factor authentication. So how does MFA works? Okay, so what happens is that we have the multi-factor authentication server sends an additional verification to challenge the user. And usually we can do a phone call, okay, that basically just places a call to the user registered phone, or a text message, just sends you a 6-digit code to your phone. Or I can use the mobile app. So like I said, using the Authenticator app, you get that token. Or I can basically also initiative an open authentication compliant tokens. This one, I can use this as also a verification method. Azure multi-factor policies. So users can be prompted to register MFA when they try to use an application or a service that is configured to require multi-factor authentication. And you can also enforce the registration using a conditional access policy from Azure AD that applies to an Azure group containing all users in your organization or just a small set of users. So from time to time, you want to maybe bring some more users, okay, to the multi-factor authentication. I really don't advise you to do this all at once because probably your staff will not have the capability to deal with all the requests from your users. Maybe choose some more important applications that you have and start by those. So your target will be the users that use those applications, and then start to grow on top of that until, yes, you have everyone in your organization using multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is an awesome way to protect your identities. It's not 100% secure, for sure not, okay? But there are several studies that says that if you had multi-factor authentication implemented, well, those things could not happen, okay? Like hacking some accounts and things like that will be prevented if they had multi-factor authentication. It doesn't mean that, well, yes, if you have MFA, that doesn't mean that you're not hackable. Of course you are. There are still options to do that. It's just harder, okay, to achieve that. So device identity in Azure, it's also another way to protect our identities, okay? And we can use applications like endpoint protection, old Intune, that can enhance the way that you know that the device it is registered in your organization following the organizational requirements. So combining Azure AD, single signing on, means that users can access some services or some apps through an approved device. And if it's a registered device on Azure AD or on Intune, basically what happens is that you can be a little bit more permissive in what they can access. Okay, so you don't need like multi-factor authentication and things like that because it's already an approved device, so you're okay. There are three types of possible registrations, okay, which is Azure AD registered, Azure AD join, or hybrid Azure AD join. So Azure AD registered, these devices will fall into the bring your own device category. They are typically owned by the user, or they have a personal Microsoft account or a local account. And the method of device registration is less restrictive because it supports devices running Windows 10, iOS, iPad, Android, macOS, you name it, okay? So the device security is typically provided from a password, for example, a PIN, a pattern, or like Windows Yellow if it's a Windows device. And then you can do a little bit better. You can go for Azure AD join. These devices are already owned by the organization, so it's not the bring on your own device model anymore. And users access your cloud-based Azure AD instance through their work account. So they will have their work account, and that the devices identities exist only in the cloud. This option is available only for Windows 10 and Server 2019 devices. Okay. Security usually for this, it's done by using either a password, a PIN code, or Windows Yellow. I can also do hybrid Azure AD join. So this option is similar to the Azure AD join, but the devices are owned by the organization and they are signing into the Azure AD accounts that belong to the organization. Devices identity exists in the cloud and also on premises. This is why it is the hybrid option, and this is why it is better suitable for organizations that still need on-premise and cloud access. Usually this option will support not only Windows 10 machines, but also Windows 7 and even Windows 8. conditional access. So conditional access policies, it's an awesome feature. I'm like a huge fan of this. I have a signal, and based on that signal, I can then make a decision, okay? And like, I'm just going to show you what kind of common signals, okay, I have, and then I will go back. So conditional common access is signals that I have. It's like a user and their location, where it is right now, in which device it is located, which application is trying to get access to, things like that. So that will be my signals. And then based on those signals together, I can make a decision. And I limited the access, remediate the risk, block the access, and then I can enforce certain things like, for example, require MFA. So basically in here, I think we resumed this pretty well. I have a bunch of signals, right? And then like imagine, oh, it is inside our corp network. So I'm okay. I trust it's a company device. So I'm like, yeah, just allow access, okay? No questions asked. Oh, it is a corporate device, but that user, it's not in the corporation network. It's not on our network. It's in a home address or something. I don't know. It's not inside the corp network. That's it. So I can say, okay, you can access, but I will require an MFA, multi-factor authentication. So you're implementing an extra layer of security on top of that. You can also put like, oh, for a certain application. For others applications, it's just querying some data. It's not relevant data. It's almost public data. Who cares, okay? I don't need MFA. So you can do this kind of stuff. So it kind of depends on what you want to achieve in terms of security. Let's do a demo on how to implement conditional access policies. Okay, let's talk about Azure conditional access policies. So I'm here in Azure tenant and an Azure subscription. If I go to Azure Active Directory and I navigate to users, you can see I have a user here called MFA that as MFA already configured on this user. But let me open here another browser in incognito. So if I just go here to portal.azure.com and I try, okay, to log in with my MFA user, which is MFA at tiagocosta.dev.onmicrosoft.com. If I do this, and if I enter with this user password, yeah, there you go. Oh, it's asking me to change my password. So I'm going to change to a different password. I click sign in. And so there you go. I'm in the Azure portal. So it's just so I could get into the Azure portal, and now I can do all sorts of things into my Azure subscriptions. I'm going to close this browser. I'm now going to search for conditional access, and I'm going to create a new policy. This new policy, what I'm going to do now, and my goal is, if that specific user wants to use the Azure portal, he needs to provide the MFA token. So he needs to use MFA. So I can just type here like demo policy, okay? I can just say that, well, this will affect a specific user. It's from users and groups, and now I can select if a specific user. You could just do a group, or you could just say, oh, it's for everyone. But in my case, I just want to include this. You could also exclude. So you say everyone with the exception of user A, B, and C. So I can do this. So I just did this just for that user. And now if I go to cloud apps, I can just say selected apps. And I have here, as you can see, okay, a bunch of applications. And in my case, I'm just selecting the Microsoft Azure management. This is all the management layer for Azure. You have here a bunch of other stuff like Intune, Forms, Microsoft Flow, etc. But you can also, and you will also see in here, applications that you might have registered. So custom applications that you have built and you have registered on Azure Active Directory. So you can also put this exact same policy that I'm building for your applications. So what I mean is this is not just for built-in applications like Azure, like Teams, Stream, or whatever. You can also do this for other applications. And I'll just click select. But now I can say, you can also have your conditions, okay? Like what is the sign-in risk of that specific user? What is the device platform? So I can just say, oh, if it's a Windows device, okay. I can just say, well, if it's in the Windows device, I'm okay. If not, if it's one of the other ones, no, I will not allow. I find them insecure or whatever. Okay, you can also do this. I'm not going to do this bit here. You can also say location, so you can just say, oh, if it's a trusted location, I'm good. If it's not, well, I might want to request some extra things. Also, the client apps and here the device state that you have there too. They are still in preview, those two. And now, what is this? The access control. Okay, I will grant access. So the MFA user wants to use the Azure portal. I will grant him access, but I will require multi-factor authentication. Okay, and you could also select require device to be marked as compliant, or hybrid Azure AD join, or required an approval client app, or required an app protection policy. I'm not going to do those. I'm just going to simplify this, just a simple demo. Required multi-factor authentication. And I do this now, enable policy on. You can't forget that. So the policy, it's on now. Now I'm going to open again here the other browser. I'm using Chrome for this bit of my demo. And I'm going where? portal.azure.com. I'm just going to use the same user that I did before. So let me see, Thiago Costa Dev on Microsoft.com. There you go. And I'm going to use, okay, the password. And when I click sign in, well, before the first time that I used this user to get into Azure Portal, well, it was just got in. I got the password right. Yeah, bam, done. Okay, but now look at this. So now it's just saying that, hey, look, you need to go to your authenticator. So I need my phone. So let me grab here my phone, and I need to open my Azure Authenticator app, and I have here, okay, a token for my MFA. So I can just type 494136, which is what's showing me right now in my mobile app, and bam, there you go. Okay, see, I'm now logged in. I can say, yeah, I want to leave this open, but I'm in the Azure portal. I got in perfect. Okay, it worked like a charm, but I needed to prove as a second factor through the MFA app that this was really me. It was not just someone that had my password. Okay, because I had my phone. Okay, my phone. I need to. I have a fingerprint unlock on my phone, so it really needs to be me. Okay, to open my phone. Okay? It cannot be someone else that also has access to my phone and things like that. So it is not. It is really me that I'm doing this, and I was able to check the token. I got in. So then this is why using conditional access policies, it is so important, and also together with multi-factor authentication. And you saw how easy it is. And of course, I can just click here and create a new policy, etc. There is only one catch. If you see here my Azure Active Directory, Okay, I'm using an Azure AD Premium P2. Okay, so this is a premium feature. Okay, so you have to have premium accounts for this. And if you see my user, okay, this user here, the MFA user, it is also using a premium account. If you go to licenses, you will see here that I'm using, okay, a premium account, and this is why this is working, and this works with this user, because if it doesn't have premium accounts, well, it was not going to work. But this is super powerful using this kind of feature, but also for you to learn more and to implement and how to implement this at your customers. I don't forget to tell this to my customers all the time, and I keep saying this and this and this. It's like implementing conditional based access policies, multi-factor authentication, self-service password reset we're going to talk about. All of this, it is very, very important in terms of improving your security in terms of identity. So as we saw earlier, there are several authentication methods that an administrator can set up. Some of these also support the self-service password reset, SSPR, which allows users to reset their passwords just by supplying a secondary form of authentication. You can couple also this together with Azure multi-factor authentication, and then that way easier is the burden of your IT staff when it comes to perform password resets. But we have to be careful, because in terms of authentication method, not all services can use the same methods. So password, yes, okay, both, okay, will be possible, but security questions and using the email address as an authentication mechanism and method, only self-service password reset, it is allowed. Then, of course, both of them also can use the authenticator app, the hardware token, a text message, a voice call. So both MFA and SSPR are allowed. But if you go for app passwords, that is not the case, okay? For app passwords, only MFA, it is possible, and only in certain cases when you're using applications that do not support MFA. Authentication in Azure Active Directory, so this always happens in two stages. So let's imagine this example in the diagram. I have the user browser, I access a web application. That web application is already registered on Azure Active Directory. So what happens is that I'm forwarded to the single sign-in on page of the Microsoft Identity Platform. I introduce my username, my password, and then I get a token that is issued that contains the information related to my authentication. And then I pass that token to the application. Then the app takes the token, validates the token to ensure that the authentication was successful, and then we get access to our application. This in the back, basically uses what we call OpenID Connect, which is an authentication layer built on top of OAuth 2.0. This one includes identity verification methods that are missing from OAuth 2.0. So basically, OpenID gives the access token plus an ID token, which we can send to the applications, like I explained previously, to prove, it is me. It is I'm really that user. Azure AD join, so I can, like we already saw before, I can join devices to Azure Active Directory without the needing to synchronize with an on-premises Active Directory. Where can I do this? So basically, if you go to the device settings, you go to Azure Active Directory, you go to devices and then device settings. And then in here, I can just come and I can just select which users I want or I don't want, to access and be able to do device registration. So I can add a pilot of group of users, try AD join, okay? So I could just go there and select it. Choose like on the first option where you see all selected and none, you could just say selected. And then I can have like just a group of users that I will allow to do this. Talking about self-service password reset, where can I configure this? So again, in the Azure portal, you go to Active Directory, and then I have an option that says password reset. So under password reset, I can just enable self-service password reset. And under authentication methods, I can basically configure how many do I need to do the reset, okay, just one or two. And what will be the methods to basically do it? The mobile app code, email, mobile phone, or security questions are some of the ones that are available. Okay, so let's do a 2-minute break. And after a break, let's talk about an amazing topic, which is Azure governance. Welcome back, everyone. So now let's talk about Azure management, and then we're going to specifically also talk about Azure governance and how Azure governance can help us in managing our Azure subscriptions. So management in the cloud refers to the tasks and processes that are required to maintain our business application and resources to support them. Azure has many services and tools that together, they provide a complete management solution. We don't have just one tool, and that tool is, oh, this is the tool to do management, and that's it. But no, we have several tools because each one of those tools will have their own purposes. So we have tools in terms of security that will take care of all the security stuff around Azure. They will do threat protection. Then I will also have like backup and disaster recovery tools. I have tools also to do monitoring, also tools to do configuration like the Azure automation that allows me to run workbooks. And I also have tools to do governance, so I can also use policy management, cost management together, and all this in the governance, let's just say, a category. So in the diagram here, it kind of illustrates some of the key different areas when we come to management. It's not just one area, it is not just one tool, but in Azure it is a set of tools that each one of them is specified and specific for each one of the areas that we can see here on our illustration. So what about governance? So we always hear about governance is so important, but governance it is really important and is one of the aspects that we saw before on the Azure management. So governance for your cloud subscriptions and usage, it is important for a lot of reasons. To enforce and audit policies for Azure services, to create compliant environments by using, for example, Azure blueprints, ensure that you're compliant with external regulations by using a built-in compliance controls. And this is super important because some of the customers that use Azure, they have a lot of regulations on their markets. And so this is really important for them. And also to monitor the spend. So do cost management and billing. That's also a very, very important bit because we don't want to have customers, and I don't want as a company to be spending more Azure credits than what I need. And so this also will allow me to optimize costs. So Azure provides you many tools and features to do this governance. So I can do Azure policies for applying basically a policy management solution. I can do Azure management groups. And when I apply Azure management groups, so I can take those policies and then apply them in a group, and that group can contain more than one subscription. And I will apply that policy already to a series of number of subscriptions. I can also easily create fully compliant environments and apply group policies to new subscriptions. They already even can come with predefined like a virtual networks in predefined locations and things like that. I can do all that using Azure blueprints. And of course, I can analyze costs and monitoring usage from a single dashboard using the cost management and billing, which is also a great way. And you can also put some cost alerts on this, create budgets. So it's a very, very cool tool to do cost management. So let's take a look on each one of these features. Azure accounts and subscriptions. So an account is what I use to sign in to the Azure website, to the Azure portals. And that's my user, my account. Then every Azure account is associated with one or more subscriptions. And a subscription, it's a logical container used to store resources and resource groups. So as you can see in this small diagram, I have one Azure account, and then I have a developer subscription, a task subscription, and a production subscription. And each one of them, they have several Azure resources that are organized in resource groups. Those subscriptions, I have many types of subscription. I have free subscriptions, pay-as-you-go, enterprise agreement. So there are just some examples of types of subscriptions. So you just need to follow, basically for your country, what will be the best option for you. If you're a really large corporation, maybe enterprise agreement will be the best one. If not, there are CSP providers, cloud solution providers, that can provide you your Azure subscriptions. And maybe that will be the best option for your case. Azure Resource Manager. In a nutshell, Azure Resource Manager is the deployment and management service that we have in Azure. So it's the back part of Azure that will define and manage your infrastructure. So you can just define this through, like, imagine a declarative template, a JSON template, and then you send this to the Resource Manager. The Resource Manager, it's able to interpret that template and then create the needed resources in the back. So we can deploy, manage, monitor all the resources in Azure. I can redeploy this. I can define dependencies. I can apply access control, RBAC, basically role-based access control. And all of this is natively integrated in the platform together with Azure AD. One higher level that I have from subscriptions is called management groups. And I'm a huge fan of this so that I can organize the subscriptions of my customers. So in here, you can see that I have a root management group. Then I have, in a hierarchy, on a second level, I have human resources, I have IT, marketing, and then I have the subscriptions. So for example, let's talk about the human resources. I have another level that says, dev and test subscription, and I have apps. I have IT. On the IT, I have production, and then Geo Region 1, Geo Region 2, and I have several subscriptions there. So there are many ways for you to organize this. I have customers that we organize this for like geos, and then Europe, Asia, United States, and then under Asia, we have several basically countries. And then inside each country, we have a set of subscriptions. Those subscriptions are only related to that specific country. Other companies that are smaller, they just have basically subscriptions for dev, subscriptions for testing, production, pre-production, non-production, call it, whatever you guys like to call it. But we can have that. And the big idea of this is now you're going to see with Azure policies, I can attach an Azure policy for one subscription or for a management group. If I have, for example, a policy to define naming conventions that I need to apply in all my Azure subscriptions, I can do this by attaching that and apply that just to the root management group. Let's see a demo on how can we explore management groups. Okay, so in order to explore management groups, let's go to the burger menu. And I can go to all services. And under all services, you can just type, manage groups. And we can, managed groups. So there you go. And we can just navigate to manage groups. And now you see that I have one root group here. And I also have several Azure subscriptions under the same level. But if I click on the root group, you can see that I have a corp management group. I have a dev team, an IT, regions, and then a training one. And if I go to corp, for example, you see that I have a subscription under corp. If for some reason you need to create, let's go back here one level and let's go to regions. And in regions, I still don't have any regions. Let's imagine that I want to add a management group on basically inside this management group. So I just say, that is great. I want to create what will be basically the group ID. I can just type like an ID, and I could just type like Asia, for example, and I could just save this, and I will just create another management group inside of this. And talking about the subscriptions, I could just basically imagine that I wanted to move this AZ Contoso training under the training management group. So you can click here and you can click move, and now you select what will be the management group that you want to select. I'll just say, basically training, for example, and you could just save, and then this subscription will be moved over there. I'm not going to do this because I don't want to change here my subscription, but this is what's going to happen. Usually it takes a few minutes for the change to happen, and also can take even more time for policies to be applied, because if in this level I have certain policies being applied, if I move this to another level, policies need to be different probably, because I have policies being applied there, so that can take a while. So you have to be a little bit patient on that. To be totally honest, that's not a big problem because we are not changing subscriptions from management groups all the time. It's something that you never do, or you do this twice in a few years. So that should not be a big problem, that waiting period. And your services are always running, so definitely not a problem on that space. So common Azure management tools. We have the Azure Portal, PowerShell, the Azure CLI, Cloud Shell, and mobile applications. We have several options here. So let's start with the portal and PowerShell. So the Azure Portal is the web interface that I can use to manage my resources. Okay, very easy. You just go to portal.azure.com, log in with your Azure account, and then you can just click here, there, and there, and there, and you can just create, delete, and manage your Azure resources. But to be totally honest with you, it's a very much clicking experience. It is good for certain actions, ad hoc queries that I need to do, etc., but it's not the best experience for everything. So I also have the possibility to use PowerShell, and currently we're using the AZ modules. And as you can see here, I can just create a virtual machine just by issuing PowerShell command let the new -az VM, and then I have several parameters that I need to put here, but I just run this and bam, I have an Azure virtual machine. I can do the same thing using Azure CLI. So CLI is based on Bash. It's a cross-platform command line program. I can use this in Windows, Mac, or Linux. Also today, PowerShell with PowerShell 7, PowerShell Core, you can also do that, the same thing, but Azure CLI is based on Bash. So if you come from a Linux background, you're more aware of Azure CLI than what you are from Azure PowerShell. Also a great tool, it's the Cloud Shell. I'm a huge fan of the Cloud Shell. So the Cloud Shell is in the browser, I can have the experience to have a console. So it's an interactive, authenticated browser shell without any kind of installation, without having to manage modules or CLI or whatever. I can just use this as it is. It is quite easy. You can use this in portal.azure.com. On the top, you have an icon of the shell. You can click it there and you can open, or you can go to shell.azure.com and also open it there. The last one is about the Azure mobile application. So for basically iOS and Android mobile application. You can just install it and then enter with your credentials. And then, of course, basically you can manage your resources straight from your phone. It is quite useful. Of course, it doesn't have all the features that you have in the portal. Well, for that, you have a web browser. Just log in on the web browser and you're in the Azure portal. But of course, this is quite interesting. And one of the favorite features that this comes with, it is come with an Azure Cloud Shell integrated in the app. So you install the app, you log in, you can even put the fingerprint so that it's just easier and more secure for you to log in. And then you can click on the Cloud Shell icon and you can just enter there and you can just start to create resources, delete resources, manage your resources straight from your phone. So resource group. So this is the first resource that you need to create. If you want to create a resource first, you have to have a resource group. So to do this, we just need to set up what is the subscription where you want, and you just type a name for your resource group, and then what is the region for this resource group. These are fundamental elements of the Azure platform. So it is a logical container for hosting all other resources like application gateways, virtual machines, app services, SQL databases, you name it. And as you can see here, I have a bunch of resource groups in here. Okay, so VNet, VMRG, DBRG, production KA or dev. Then I have another one called finance, marketing, HR. And then I have even prod finance, dev finance. It is a very mixed way here in this slide to organize resource groups. So you have to organize this in the best way that fits your needs. There is no best practice that says you have to use like this and that's it. If there was something like that, well, just Microsoft will just enforce that, period, okay, and that's it. No, the idea is you just need to use this as the best way that you can, because like using prod finance or dev finance, well, sometimes we have subscriptions that are just for production. So yeah, well, this doesn't make any sense. So we can just use basically what is the app, because this is something that is just production. Okay, all the stuff that is in this subscription, it is production. I don't need to write prod. There is no need for that, and you should use that. I can move resources across resource groups. So we can do this, and I can even basically move resources from one resource group to another resource group that exists in a different subscription. If my Azure account reaches the 2 subscriptions, of course, we can do that. There are some resources that you cannot move. So there is an article, if you search on your basically your search engine, move resources across resource groups, you go to an article on Docs that basically states all the resources that you can move and the ones that you cannot move. It's a very complete list, and it's always good to read at least the ones that you cannot move, because the list is smaller there, to prep for the exam. So this is why I put this note for the exam bit here. It's a great tip for the exam. Remove resource groups. Yes, you can do this. So just go to the portal, okay, and you just click delete resource group. It will ask you what is the name of the resource group. So you just, as a confirmation, basically, you just type my resource group 0201. You press OK, and then bam, okay, your resource group starts to be deleted. It will not be deleted immediately. Usually it takes some time to delete the resource group, so you have to have a little bit of patience, but eventually it will be deleted. Sometimes it can take a good 20, 30, 40 minutes. That is fine, okay? Just leave it running. It will delete your stuff. Depends on the amount and the size of resources that you have inside and the complexity of those resources. Use tags to organize resources. Well, tags allow you to associate custom details about your resources in addition to the already existing Azure properties that resource has. A resource can have a limit of 15 tags, and this is much key value pairs. So examples of things that you can have here is like department, environment, cost center, who is the owner of this resource. So things like this that you can have on tags. And then you can use tags to search in your Azure, on the Azure portal, or search for resources using PowerShell and Bash even. We also have Azure policies. So basically, with Azure policies, I can enforce organizational standards, or I can just evaluate them, not enforce them, but just evaluate them and understand what is my status of my subscription, for example, regarding a certain policy. For that, I have the policy dashboard where I can see all of that. I can also do policy definitions. It's using JSON. There's a great repo on GitHub with policy definitions. You can search for that too. You'll find it for sure, and then you can find it. It is pretty useful, that one, because Microsoft already has some built-in policies, but they also have others in that GitHub repo that you can just go there and grab it. They have, for example, for tags, a lot of them for tags. They have like 9 or 10 or 11, something like this over there, which is quite useful. Policy initiatives. It is a group of policy definitions. So I create a bunch of policy definitions, then I can group them in an initiative, and then I can basically enforce that initiative into a scope. And when I do that, I'm basically saying that, well, in that resource group, or in that subscription, or in that management group, I will enforce that initiative. Regarding Azure policies, so you have here like an example of me creating a policy definition. So you go to the basics, you just say, where is the location of this? the name enforce tag on resource, and then you have the JSON part in the last bit over there that you're just saying that you're enforcing that resources need to have a tag. And then you can say over there what is the tag name, and then what is the name of tags such as environment and things like that. So they have to have a tag called environment, for example, okay? That way you're making sure that your resources are created in your subscription always have that specific tag, because it's something that you need to have, like cost center. You have to charge this to someone, so you really need to have cost centers in all the resources. Let's do a demo now, and let's see how we can implement Azure policies. So now let's do a demo about Azure policies. So let's just search here for policy, and we're going to the policy experience. I can search some of the built-in definitions for policies that we already have here. And as you can see, so we have here quite a few of them. I can search, for example, for a location. There is one that I particularly like to demo, which is this one. It's the allowed locations. This policy checks where you are creating your resources, and in case of not fulfilling the parameter here that you have here for the list of the allowed locations, which are the regions where you allow your administrators to create resources, I will have an effect of deny. So with this deny, basically you're really not allowing them to create those resources, only if they create those resources in one of the regions that you allow. So I can just assign this directly from here. I need to select what is the scope. And like I said before, so I can have the scope of a management group. I can select the scope of a subscription, or I can even go to the detail of a specific resource group. And I have here this AZ group policy demo resource group that I previously created. So I can assign here. And if I go to parameters, I can select which are the regions where I allow this to be created. And I'll just say just West Europe. I will review and create. I will click create. We need to wait a few seconds for this to be created, and there you go, it is done. So now if I create a resource, and let's for example try your storage account, and I'll just say create. I have to select that specific resource group, which is this AZ group demo. I will just create here my policy demo 123 or 1123, that's fine. And I will choose not West Europe, so I have to choose something else like East US, for example. And I click review and create. So even though this have passed, if I click create, you're going to see that I get an error, and you already have the error in here. And if you see here, so basically there is a problem with this policy, okay? So you're not allowed because of a policy, and this is the name of the policy. Okay, so you could click here and you can check, okay, what are the policies. So you see your policy allowed locations. You click and you can even go directly to that policy definition, and you can check why, okay, you cannot create things. And we have Azure policies for other things like to enforce tags, allowed resources that you can create, a resource that you cannot create. So there are a bunch of policies, but the idea, it is pretty much this. And this is in the Azure governance space. It is quite astonishing the number of things that we can do with simple Azure policies. Another great way to orchestrate deployment of resources and check a bunch of policies that you are allowed or not allowed to do in your Azure subscriptions is to use Blueprints. So Blueprints allows you to define a repeatable set of Azure resources that implement and add aware to your organizational standards, patterns, and requirements. There are even some already built-in blueprints for some of the major standards, like some ISO standards and like some standards, for example, for the UK, for the NHS in the UK. There are others that don't come straight from Azure, so you don't have access directly in Azure, but you can download it from GitHub and you can just use them there. And of course, you can always build your own blueprint. Role-based access control provides also fine-grained access management for Azure resources. It just enables you to grant users the specific rights they need just to perform their job. So RBAC is basically a core service, and it is included in your subscriptions, and it doesn't come with a pricing tier associated. There's no pricing tag with this. Using RBAC, I can allow, for example, one user to manage a virtual machine in a subscription and having another one that just manages networks, for example, because one, it's a Windows server administrator and the other one is a network administrator. So yeah, it makes all the sense to do things like this. So for doing this, I just need to go to the access control EIM in the scope that I want. I select the role that I want to attribute, and then I select which is the user or group of users. So basically the security principle where I can attribute the rights. So role-based access control, I have those three basically things that I have to have, which is what is a security principle, user, a group, or a service principle. The definition, it's one of the built-in role definitions like a owner, contributor, reader, or other specific roles for specific services. Like, for example, I can be an ACR contributor, which I can basically create container images to Azure Container Registries. I can do pools and things like that. So that's specific permissions for a specific resource. And then the scope. The scope can be the management group, can be a subscription, a resource group, or even a specific resource. So now let's do a demo and let's explore Azure RBAC. Okay, so I'm in the Azure portal. I'm going to navigate to resource groups, and now I'm going to select this Azure group policy demo. If I go to the access control EIM blade, I can add and I can do a role assignment. When I do this, so the scope here is the resource group. So I just need two more things, which is the role that I'm going to give. And I can just say, well, you're going to be a contributor. And then I can find a specific user, and I can find this user here, like AZ104, and I can press save. And right now, so this user has the contributor permission level. So that is the role that I gave to that specific user. You can always view here the role assignments. And if you see, I have a bunch of role assignments already in here, but you can see that, well, contributor, this one has contributor access. So this is also something that I can easily check in here when you just go to role assignments and you just check this. I always love this feature here, check access. So I can just find here someone. I'll just find this AZ104, and there you go. I can click on the AZ104 and you can check that, well, this user, okay, 104, basically has contributor access to the scope of the resource where I am. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. So that this is great to check, is this person or this user has permission to do this or that. And yeah, you can just investigate here. It is pretty easy to find what it can or cannot do. If now I log in with this user, the contributor allows me to add resources to this specific resource group. But If that user doesn't have permission to any of the other resource groups or any other resource, you're not going even to see them. But they're in the subscription. Your subscription has more things, but your user, in terms of authorization, is only authorized to see what you have inside that specific resource group. So resource groups are a great border to do permissions and to do role-based access control. This is why it's one of the reasons why they exist, is to do this kind of things. If I have network devices, I'm going to try to put them in a set of resource groups so that if I have a network administrator, I just need to provide permissions to that network administrator to the network resource groups. So only the network related resource groups are the ones that I want that specific user to have access. So let's talk about resource logs and how can I use resource logs to protect my resources. I have two types of logs, delete and read-only logs. So the delete logs will allow all operations against the resource, but will block you the ability to delete those resources. So if I add the log to a resource group, it is going to be a delete log. If you try to delete that resource group or some resources inside that resource group, you're going to get an error like the one that you see here in the screenshot. Then I can also do the read-only. Read-only will only allow you to read activities. So it will block deletion, but also it will block modifications in the resources. The delete one allows you to do modifications, just not allows you to do deletions of the resources. Those logs can be applied at the subscription level, at a resource group level, and also at individual resources. And they are super important, especially for production scenarios. It is not the first, it will not be the last customer that I have that just calls me, sends me a message, it's just complaining that, oh my God, we just deleted here some very important resources. How can we click undo or just do something like that? There's like a PowerShell command to do that. Well, there isn't. But the thing is, everything that is production, you should lock them against deletions. You should not allow a virtual machine to be deleted. Okay, you just can't have that. It is quite dangerous to have that unlocked. Someone can just go there with the right permissions and they can just confuse one resource group with the other, and bam, you just delete the production instead of one of the other environments. Believe me, this happens. Okay, it shouldn't happen. Of course, you should pay attention what we are doing, but we are all humans. We all do mistakes like this. So this is why resource logs are so important. Best practices for RBAC. Role-based access control really segregates the duties within your team, like I was saying before. So we should, if I have like someone that is from the network team, well, that network team person should only have permissions to resources around networking. You should not have like app service access to databases, or access to storage accounts with data and things like that. Okay, we just should give and grant users the lowest privilege level that they need to do their work. I should also use resource logs to ensure critical resources aren't modified or aren't deleted, like I said before. RBAC, it is great, and we have the three big roles like contributor, reader, and owner. That's like the three big generic roles, but sometimes I need specific custom roles for Azure resources. So if built-in roles are just not fulfilling your needs, you can just go and you can just create your own built-in definitions. And you have here some example on how to do this using PowerShell. But basically the template itself, it is a JSON file. Again, there is also GitHub repos with examples of specific JSON custom roles. So you can just go there and navigate and check a little bit this so that you can find some of them, and you'll be surprised by some of the quality of some of the roles that you have over there. You can also identify auditing requirements. So Azure AD audit logs, they provide records of system activities and compliance to access auditing reports. You can go for users, you go for auditing reports, okay, in Azure Active Directory, and then if you're a user in the security administrator, security reader, report reader, or global administrator roles, you can then access this data. This will include logs such as creation of VMs, starting websites, dropping databases. So a lot of this kind of logs will be there. The activity logs will be available for 90 days. So 90 days, it is basically the availability of this data. And again, this is one of those core services, so you just don't pay for this. It is included in your subscription already. If you want, you can store this data into storage accounts or log analytics workspaces, but over there, of course, well, you pay the corresponding prices of storage or log analytics workspace. I will advise you to store this data more than 90 days. It's always a good idea. I don't say forever, you just don't need that, but at least for a certain amount of time more, yes, than just the 90 days. What about Azure Pricing Calculator? So this is a website. You go to azure.microsoft.com/pricing/calculator and you get here. It's a free web-based tool that can help you estimate costs for your Azure resources. You just go there. You don't even require to have an Azure subscription to check out this. You can just go there and can just say, oh, compute virtual machines. You select what is your virtual machine, how many hours per month that virtual machine is going to be turned on. Because, well, if you have virtual machines that you don't need them all the time, you can shut them down to save money and things like that. So you can just put all that data there, and then storage accounts, SQL databases, web apps, containers, etc. Then in the end, this will provide you a quote of how much money this is going to cost you. It is quite cool, okay, what you can achieve with this. Also, you can download Excel sheet, and in that Excel, then you can manipulate more the data if you want and if you need. What about billing? So if you go to your subscription and you go to cost analysis, you can access all your invoices, okay, in here, but you can also do the cost analysis breakdown. So you can understand that I have there, as you can see, a batch account that is costing me like almost $1,200 US dollars. And I have another scheduler job, an app service, some storage accounts, and you can check like resource by resource, what is the value of that. You can also filter this by tags. So I want to understand how much money is it costing me development environments, or I'm just analyzing 3 use cases, okay, and it's just, oh, how much money did it cost me use case 1, use case 2, or use case 3, so that I can also help me decide on this. So this is the kind of stuff that we can have based also on tags. Predict and optimize with Azure Advisor. So the Azure Advisor is a free service, so another free service that is built in Azure that will provide recommendations on high availability, on security, on performance, and on cost. So all of this free of charge, you're going to get some recommendations. And like costs, you can reduce costs by eliminating unprovisioned, like an express route circuit, for example. Virtual machines that they are working, but no one is using those virtual machines. Or you have a bunch of virtual machines running, and then you can just say, oh, you could just use reserved instances because you're always using 10 virtual machines of this size all the time. Why don't you just get some reserved instances for this, okay? So this is the kind of things that you're going to get here as recommendations. Also, in terms of availability or security, like, oh, you should use on storage accounts, for example, always basically HTTPS and not allow HTTP connections. And you have here some storage accounts that you're still allowing HTTP. Why? Okay, and sometimes I have customers that, to be totally honest with you, they don't realize, okay, that they have those issues in terms of security, because they don't even realize that that's something, that a mistake that they have in their configuration. And when you tell them, they're like, oh my God, really? We have that like that? Yeah, you have. And sometimes there are even big customers. Azure policies also can help on these kind of things, but still, this is something that you need to pay attention. And Azure Advisory is cool. Just come here and bam, you have those recommendations in here. Also, cost optimization here. So you can see here, I have two optimizations in this example. One is to buy virtual machine reserved instances, because you can save money, and you could save every month like almost $400 with this. And then you have the right size or shut down underutilized virtual machines. So you have 8 virtual machines, okay, over there, that maybe they're not even being used, or they are too big. The SKU that you're using is just too big for what you're doing with them. So you just can choose smaller sizes, or even shut down those virtual machines because they're not being used. So there you go. It's another recommendation. And believe me, that seeing values like thousands of euros in optimizations that you can do on Azure Advisory in customers, in corporate customers, it is not that strange. I have a customer when we have a huge number there, and it's like virtual machines, okay? What is this virtual machine? Who this virtual machine belongs to? And they don't know. There are subscriptions that they don't know who that virtual machine belongs to. So yeah, sometimes I have the crazy dream of just shut down the VM and wait for someone to complain. To be honest, I can't do that, of course, and I'm not going to do that. It might be a very critical system that is not that much used, but sometimes it's like, if no one is using this, is it really critical? I don't know. Okay, just I think most of them, they're just virtual machine that someone just forgot to have them running on Azure. So you really have this in a lot of companies. Just can't be like this. You have to understand what your virtual machines are, what your resources are, who they belong, why they are turned on, and things like that. Okay, so you really need to know that. Let's do a demo now about the Azure Advisor. So there you go. We're again in the Azure portal. If I just search by advisor, you get to the Azure Advisor. And we are refreshing the recommendations. So let's wait a few seconds. So as you can see, I have a cost area. I have a security, high availability, operational excellence, and performance. Regarding performance, I'm good. Okay, I don't have any recommendations, but I have some recommendations on costs, and I can save 68 euros, okay, a year. And as you can see here, I can delete some public IP addresses because they are not associated with any running Azure resource, and there are 2 public IP addresses. I could click here, I could see what resources they are. Okay, you could just see those, and I could even select those 2, and I could just say quick fix, and this will just delete the resources for me. I could do that. I'm not going to do that, okay, because I need those resources to just explain Azure Advisor. This is a demo subscription, so I'm paying this so that I can show everyone, this works. But hey, in a real subscription, I will just delete this. If it's not being used, hey, we just don't need to run this. Also security, I have here, as you can see, 11 high impact recommendations, 9 medium and 5 low. Whoa, at least the 11 that are high impact, they should be really analyzed. And you see here that I have MFA should be enabled on accounts with owner permissions on your subscription, and I have basically 7 subscriptions that they have users that are having owner in terms of permissions and as a role that they do not have multi-factor authentication. That's really serious in terms of an account, an Azure account. So you really don't want that. Also, I have 8 SQL servers that I don't have advanced data security. I have also internet-facing virtual machines that should be protected with an NSG. I don't have that in one of my virtual machines. External accounts with owner permissions. I have one external account. I could say, well, this is for me. Okay, I see this. Okay, there's this one here. And I'm like, okay, but look, I don't see this as an issue, okay? So you can just provide some feedback here, say, well, this is not a useful one for me. And you can even go back, okay? And you can even just say, hey, don't bother me anymore with this one, okay? You can just dismiss, okay, some of the recommendations that you have in here. Those are just recommendations. Doesn't mean that you really need to blindly follow them. Well, it should some of them, but don't need all of them for sure. In terms of VI availability, see, I also have here to enable active gateways for redundancy, enable soft delete to protect your blob data. So I have like some very cool recommendations here. And again, same thing, okay? Click here and yeah, I could just dismiss this one, for example, if I don't want to be bothered with this anymore. But yeah, this is what we have in here in the Azure Advisor, and this is why I love the Azure Advisor. It's like one of my favorite tools, to be honest, on Azure, because it provides me very, very important insights. And if you start to analyze a subscription in a customer, one of the first things that I do is I check here and I check what are the recommendations of the advisor and how can I implement those together with my customers. Another free tool that I have is the Azure Cost Management. This is another built-in tool that I can just use this to gain greater insights into whether my cloud money, my Azure credits are going. I can see historical breakdowns of what services I'm spending my money on, and I can understand also if I continue to spend this amount of money, if I don't shut down services, what is going to be the amount of money that I'm going to pay in the end of the month. So you can have a prediction, basically, that how much money you're going to pay. You can also create budgets. So you create a budget like, oh, I have a budget for this month that I will say that I can pay 20,000 euros. And then you can create even alerts based on the budgets, like, oh, when your budget it is spent 50%, when it is 75%, and when it is 90%, and when it is 100%, so that you can track your expenses in your Azure subscription. We also have the Azure Total Cost of Ownership calculator. So it's another calculator that I have that generates a report that compares the costs of on-premises infrastructure with the costs of using the Azure products and services to host my infrastructures. And you can see here, so for example, I have a total cost of ownership of 30 million euros, roughly. And the Azure cost, okay, it is only $600,000, okay, so they will compare one with the other with detailed things. This includes how much money does licensing cost, how much money does it cost to build and manage a data center, paying salaries to some people, manage all of that. So all of this, it is included in this TCO calculation. How to save money. I love this. This is reserved instances. So if I have, imagine a virtual machine workload that is always running, it is predictable, runs 24/7 every day of the year, and it is going to run on, I don't know, 10 virtual machines of that specific size. And I'm sure that this will run, because I will need this like for the next 1 year, the next 3 years. So this is where reserved instances are great. So if with the reserved instances, I purchase a 1 year or a 3 year term, and I pay that fully upfront, or I can even now pay every month too, but I do a commitment that I need to pay that for 3 years. So because you do that commitment, Microsoft basically will get lower prices, and it can give you savings that can go up to 70%. Really depends a lot on the specific virtual machines with specific locations, but yeah, it can go to those values. So it is quite something. Okay, it is a very, very important thing. Again, I see customers running virtual machine workloads that they are running that for years and years and years, and they do not want to change them for sure. They need them. They can't change them. And some of them are legacy systems that, well, they have so much other stuff to migrate that it's not their priority to migrate those workloads. So those workloads will be there for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years for sure. And reserved instances, it is a great bet for those kinds of resources. You have to be careful is that, well, if your workloads are workloads that might change in like 3-4 months, you might migrate them. Well, don't use reserved instances right now. Wait for the new architecture and then think about if it makes sense reserved instances, because currently reserved instances, it's not just for virtual machines. I can use this in storage accounts, SQL databases, Cosmos DB, Databricks, you name it. There is a lot of options where reserved instances might be a great catch. So now it's time to do a demo. So let's do a demo on cost management and billing back in the Azure portal. If I just go to virtual machines, for example, I can just click add. I can just create a virtual machine, or I can just click here reservations. And I can view all my reservations that I have, or I can just purchase a new Azure reservation. And in here, because look, I was in the virtual machine experience, I went straight to the virtual machine. But you can see here for blob storage, for database, for Postgre, for Data Explorer, for Red Hat OpenShift, for app services, SUSE managed disks, Azure dedicated hosts, etc. So there are a lot of them available there that you can basically buy them into reservations. So let's just go here. Let's just search for a family, which is basically standard underscore DS. So if I just search for standard underscore DS, I need to basically write the correct name, and I go for the DS3. So it's a 4-core machine, 14 gigs of RAM. So you see here that I'm going to pay monthly, 88 euros, and this is a 57% estimate saving for a 3-year contract. I can just say I want to pay this up front, and well, if I select this one, you'll see that I will pay upfront for 3 years this amount of money, almost 3,200 euros. But then I will not pay anything more. This is what I'm going to pay for my virtual machine, for the compute capacity. I will not pay a single euro more for the next 3 years. And I could just select this here. And now I can tell that, hey, look, I don't need just one. I need 25 of those virtual machines. And this is calculating. And there you go. It's like 80,000 euros. I can just review this and buy. And if I do this, I get 25 virtual machines with 3 years that I will never pay any more money for the next 3 years. What happens is the first 25 machines of that specific size that you create in this subscription in this region, they are not going to be charged. If I create 26 virtual machines, well, that last one is going to be billed as the pay-as-you-go value. So there's no reserved instance for that. But the first 25 they will be free. You're not going to pay them anymore because you're already paid up front. And so for the next 3 years, they are totally free of charge. It's quite good. And of course, I just needed to click here, okay, review and buy, then click buy. I'm going to carefully close this here, okay, so that I will not be charged 80,000 euros on my credit card. I will prefer to spend that money in technology toys, let's just say that. But well, there you go. Okay, so this is reserved instances. Another great way to also save some Azure credits is to use the Azure hybrid benefit for Windows Server and SQL Server. This allows customers that are having enterprise agreement contracts with Microsoft to move some of the licenses from on-prem to use on Azure. When you're migrating workloads, you're migrating from on-prem to Azure. So if you don't need the licenses anymore on-prem, you can just move those licenses to use in Azure. With this benefit, allows you exactly, in terms of licensing, to do exactly that. So this is why it is so interesting, so that you can have your licenses paid in probably a lower rate than the one even that you're going to pay inside Azure. And of course, you're already paying because you already have a commitment for a contract for 1, 2, 3 years. So why not reuse those licenses? You just don't need to pay those licenses again. It just doesn't make any sense. What about analyzing resource utilization and consumption? So I can use Azure diagnostic logs. So Azure Monitor makes available 2 types of diagnostic logs, tenant logs and resource logs. Tenant logs are those logs that come from tenant level services that exists outside subscriptions, like Azure Active Directory logs. And I also have the resource logs that are resources that logs that come from services that are deployed resources, like network security group, like a storage account, like a virtual machine. And I can basically have all those logs inside log analytics. And then on top of this, I can create alerts. So I can create an alert. And today we have a common experience for Azure alerts. This means that I can just create an alert based on a signal like CPU performance on a specific virtual machine. And then I can create an action group, and that action group can, for example, be sending an email message for a list of recipients, plus sending a text message, plus starting a logic app, or even an Azure function. So here you have the Azure action groups. So I go to Monitor, Manage Actions, I click Create, add an action group, and then as you could see over there, so I have several options that I can have to create my action group. And then I just need to connect that action group with the alert that I have. Also, the Azure Monitor. Basically, I have in the Azure Monitor 2 big types of data that I can ingest into my log analytics. It will be metrics and logs. When I say metrics, I'm saying numerical values with a timestamp associated, and some metadata about which resource we're talking about. Like, for example, I have a CPU performance, and if it is CPU performance for a specific virtual machine, you can have then charts, and using the metrics explorer, like the picture as you see here on the right, and you can build those kinds of charts that you see over there. And you see over there that, well, it is all pretty well stable. We have some peaks, but nothing fancy. But then, bam, we have like a huge spike. Okay, over in the end of the chart. Okay, that is something that you need to analyze. why we have that spike in the demand, okay? So we can have these charts that are very visible. I can also have logs. So Logs Analytics is a web tool that is used to write and execute Azure Monitor log queries. I can just come here. By the way, I already have a bunch of queries, built-in queries that I can just reuse. But then I can also issue my own queries with this, and then you can literally query all sorts of data that you concentrate in your log analytics workspace, and you can correlate data coming from Azure, but also coming from other sources. So you can have your on-premises servers providing data to log analytics. I can also have data coming from other clouds to log analytics, and then I have just one single plate where I can have all that data, so I can query all that information. I can also visualize logs and create alerts on log data that I have. So I can visualize and I can create some fancy dashboards like the one that you're seeing over there, like unique sessions of users, failed requests, the availability of this application, etc. So I can just create some dashboards in the Azure portal like the one that you're seeing there. So, okay, so now it's time to have some quiz question. So let's go for the first question. So I have the user, it's called user-az104 as the security administrator role in your Azure AD tenant. The administrator has enabled the following SSPR settings. So self-service password reset settings. Number of minutes required to reset, it's 2. Number of questions to register, it is 3. And number of questions to reset, it is 3. And then we basically ask how many security questions user AZ104 is required to answer to reset the password. So how many questions? So you see that it's required to answer to reset the passwords. And then I have there questions to reset 3, questions to register 3. So I'm like, well, 3 might be a great chance. But then I start to look at this and say, well, 1 and 2, it doesn't make sense, right? I don't have anything here that is 1 or 2. And then I also see 0. So I'm like, well, 0, it's why I have 0 in here? Does it make sense or not? Well, in this case, it makes all the sense because that is the correct answer. Okay, so sometimes you have to really pay attention to the question, okay? Because they told you that user was having the administrator role. So what happens is that Microsoft enforced strong default 2-gate password reset policies for any Azure administrator role. So this is a different policy than the one defined for your users. So that's why this is the correct answer. Second question that I bring you is, your company users are reporting several unsolicited MFA requests. What feature should your users use to report those requests? Self-service password reset, fraud alerts, conditional access, or Azure alerts? Well, they need to use that feature, right? So the users. Well, self-service password reset, look, that is to do basically password resets. This is basically report unsolicited MFA request that I got. Well, that doesn't make sense, this one. Then I have others that like Azure alerts. Well, users are not going to use Azure alerts for sure. That's IT administrators, Azure administrators that are going to use. And conditional access, well, users don't even know what this is. They see it in action, they pass through the experience, but they don't know in the back. That's called a conditional access. So yeah, the answer on this, it is the fraud alert answer. And then sometimes you have questions like this. It is quite obvious for you to find the answer because you know this. You know well the topic. So it is, yes, it is sometimes obvious for you. And then some of the questions are easy, okay? They are not a hard questions to go by. Then I have the third question. Your company just got on board on Azure. You got a new Azure AD tenant and subscription. So you're like brand new to Azure. Your administrators want to make sure you can only create virtual machines on approved regions. How can you achieve this request? Well, if you're here since the beginning of our class today, you saw that we just did this. But let's just go this. I can create an Azure AD role and assign to the subscription. I can create an Azure AD role and assign to users that need to create virtual machines. Well, I can do one or two, yeah, for sure, but it is just not going, okay, to provide me the ability to only create virtual machines in approved regions. It will allow me or not to give permissions to certain users in certain scopes, and that's it, no more than that. This has to be done with policies. And so I have C and D. The first one I can say create an Azure policy and assign to the subscription. And the last one is create an Azure policy and assign it to the users that need to create virtual machines. Well, basically the last one, it is not one. It is the correct answer will be C because, well, you cannot assign a policy to users. Remember, you assign a policy to a management group, to a subscription,